A fight is brewing between restaurants and food aggregators like Zomato. While 1,000 restaurant owners have decided to log out of apps that offer customers deep discounts on dining out, Zomato has appealed for dialogue. Now, while this fight reflects the huge competition and crumbling economics of the food business, it also points to a larger issue. We have seen similar skirmishes between ride services like Ola and Uber and their driver partners. In fact, Mumbai saw an 11-day strike by drivers last October. On the other hand, giants like Amazon and Flipkart have had their share of challenges. An association of vendors has taken Flipkart to court, accusing them of unfair and discriminatory pricing. The same story extends across sectors. Multiplexes have now reportedly said they will not screen movies that have pre-existing deals with OTT players to run the movie before or on the day of release. There is a common thread in all these instances, that of a clash between brick and mortar and online businesses that are effectively aggregators. A fight between, in a sense, the new economy and the old economy. To talk now on the implications of this, I am joined this evening by Gurbaxish Singh Kohli, President of the Hotel and Restaurant Association of Western India, K. Vaitheswaran, founder of IndiaPlaza.com, and Ujjwal Chaudhary, Director at Retsia Consulting. Welcome to all of you and thank you for speaking with us. Mr. Kohli, can we first start talking about this logout campaign and why restaurant owners feel that being on aggregators and such services is harming their business? Isn't it in fact giving you access to customers you wouldn't have had earlier?
Well, anything has to be a win-win situation between the two parties. We were in receipt of widespread complaints from our members and from affiliated and associations for restaurants, as well as acute condemnation and agitation from members, regional associations and affiliated associations about, there's a whole lot of points which they have, made us aware of. And while we also agree that, there should be dialogue, that's why we have called upon these food service aggregators to engage in a fruitful dialogue with the Federation and their affiliated and associated associations, pointing out
what's
all the
the
unethical
issue, though?
business practices.
Yeah,
involved.
but what's the issue, though?
Yes. Well, there's a well, just outlining, I'll just give you headers on what the problems were. Some of the problem was, number one, they were lopsided and oppressive contracts. Most of these contracts are one-sided. They are not in favor of the participating restaurant. They are more favoring the aggregator. There are high commissions. There's a payment issue. When you're supposed to receive the payments, because payments are collected by the food service aggregators and not paid in time. There are unreasonable additional charges.
Right.
There are unethical practices, like, for example, showing that the restaurant is closed if they do not adhere to their terms and conditions. And there are like 8, 12, 13 such points which we have brought to their notice.
Okay, let me get in a view over here, from Mr. Vaitheswaran on how this all works out. Now, I have to say over here that we've reached out to aggregators like Zomato and Swiggy, and they have not wanted to participate in this debate or put their point of view across. But we're also talking about a broader picture. Let's start with what's happening with restaurants and food aggregators. Do you think this is the kind of problem that we've seen between the old economy and the new economy? You saw something similar with Ola, Uber and driver partners. Retailers are upset with, Amazon and Flipkart. Do you see the same thread?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think it's exactly the same thread and the same theme is playing out. And I think it happens all over the world. Essentially, what's happening is for any of the new economy businesses, the internet-based technology businesses, to grow fast and scale, they need very close partnership with the offline partners and vendors and restaurants and everybody else. So initially, the problem essentially stems because it shows a shift in the balance of power. At the start of the business, all the balance of power is actually lying with the vendors and the partners in the restaurants. So the food aggregators and the cab aggregating companies like Ola and Uber and everybody else actually go out to woo the drivers and the vendors in the restaurants. But as the business scales, at some stage, these companies such as the cab aggregators and the the food aggregators start to believe that the balance of power is now with them and they can control the business the way they want, and they probably need the restaurants less than they needed them when they started. The reality is that for any business to work, there needs to be a balance of power that is equal on both sides.
Yeah.
It's the only partnership that works. But clearly, when the balance of power is shifting, you will see all sorts of agitation, either by party one or party two. Right now, I think the balance of power, it seems as if the balance of power is gone on the other side. So the restaurants and the cab drivers are agitating, and it's a reasonable agitation. I can understand where they're coming from.
Ujjwal, I want your take on, what we're seeing right now with food aggregators and restaurants specifically. So about 1,000 of them over the last week said they will log out of these apps. And when it came to those numbers, you finally seen some kind of a response from Zomato. In fact, Zomato chief Deepinder Goyal tweeted out over the weekend saying that, don't go on strike per se, come to the table and talk to us. Has it now come to a situation where neither side can do without the other? So they will have to find a way forward, especially when it comes from the restaurant's point of view?
Sure. I think let's just look at what the food tech partner ecosystem or the restaurant ecosystem today looks like. So there are almost 500,000 restaurants today which are online, which is almost 10 to 15% of all of the restaurants in India. So, 6 months back, we started looking at how does a food tech platform impact the restaurants. What we saw was that majority of platforms which are more than 1 year on a platform start getting almost 25 to 30% of their revenue from these platforms. The interesting part is that all of this is additive revenue. It's not like people are not going out anymore. So all of this revenue that we are talking about, which is 30% additional revenue, is actually getting added to their top line. So there's a second point. The third point is that for a restaurant, the orders that they get from these platforms is actually pre-commission higher EBITDA.
Yeah.
So if a restaurant has a 25% EBITDA on a normal, dining order, they actually have almost a 40% EBITDA on the delivery order. So in a nutshell, there has been a lot of value that has been created by the food tech platforms for these restaurants.
Yeah.
Now, coming to this specific issue, I think it is not justified to say that, the restaurants are being strong-armed into accepting these conditions. And I think from what I have seen, the number of restaurants which have logged out is somewhere between 1,000 to 3,000. Which is a fairly small number considering the overall impact that these restaurants today have, these platforms today have on the food tech ecosystem. So in my mind, I think, a lot of times these platforms do get targeted because of their high visibility, as well as the high standards of responsibility and accountability that they have on themselves. I think these are some of the reasons that a lot of times these platforms get targeted.
Okay,
and
Mr. Kohli, will you respond to that? Do you think the platforms are being targeted by restaurants? And, Mr. Chaudhary, they're making the point that even if it's 1,000 to 3,000, it's not going to make too much of a difference. These aggregators have high standards and restaurants are not liking it, perhaps.
Well, I'm sure they're not liking it, and while I would tend to disagree with the gentleman who spoke last, sorry, my feed is not clear, so I couldn't really understand. There's some feedback, but what I could understand is Well, I would beg to differ. It's not like that. Firstly, these aggregators have no standards, leave alone high standards. It was our association who made them realize that you cannot have, people included in your list who don't have standards at all. There is a restaurant and there is one Raju sandwich wala. Where does the standards go? Well, that's debatable and we shouldn't get into that. But there are coercive tactics which they are using. Yes, while I agree that it should be a win-win situation for all, and the aggregators do bring in additional business, and but for the kitchens and the cloud kitchens, the dark kitchens, and only the kitchens, delivery kitchens, this is perhaps one of the only ways to advertise and get their wear across. Restaurants, not so much. I don't think they add too much value to an already established restaurant. But then there are restaurants growing every day, and that's where the aggregators come in. I don't really understand what are the high standards which the gentleman was talking about, because
let him respond.
there are FSAI laws and other standards which a restaurant has to have to follow.
Okay, let him respond.
I don't know what additional standards.
Okay. Let him respond. Let him respond to that point.
Ujjwal,
why don't you respond to that point? Their point is, if it's a well-known restaurant, if it's a well-established chain, then perhaps they don't really need the aggregators and don't need to be arm twisted. I think the pain point started with a product called Infinity, where you can go and eat at high-end restaurants at very cheap prices. I mean, they have to run the costs of actually keeping the place open.
Sure. So, in my understanding, all of these are opt-in schemes. You do not have to be on these schemes. It's not necessary or mandatory for the restaurants to actually come on these schemes. And given that, not all schemes would be for each and every restaurant. So, the partners can actually decide which scheme they want to actually opt for. And if their economics does not allow them to be a part of certain scheme, they can certainly opt out. So, in that sense, while there is a lot of narrative around how a platform arm twists some of these restaurants, it's not really true.
Okay, I'm going to let Vaitheswaran weigh in on this restaurant versus aggregator debate before we move on to the bigger picture, because like we said in the beginning, it's a pattern, across sectors. But on this restaurant versus aggregator debate, it's more nuanced than it seems at first sight, isn't it, Mr. Vaitheswaran?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, I think there is a strong point to be made on both sides. It is true that if it's an already established restaurant, then the food aggregators really may or may not be building too much of value. The restaurants are already running full, so it's not that they need the additional business. And I'm not sure about the commission thing. I have a feeling that for well-established restaurants, the supply that they made through food aggregators, while it may be additional on the face of it, is probably a lower margin business, because they certainly will make more gross margins inside the restaurant. So it may be additional, but it's probably a lower margin business. I suspect that's what happens. But on the other hand, if it's a smaller restaurant, then the game is exactly reverse. On the other hand, the fact of the matter is that it is a contract that was offered to the restaurants by these people. The restaurants very well knew what they were getting into it. They certainly enjoyed it for several months, maybe a year now. And now that they're realizing that this is actually becoming larger than they thought, and obviously it's impacting the overall gross margins at an average is coming down, because they have to now put in more resources to pick, pack, and ship in the orders. They're perhaps now trying to put pressure back on the food aggregators to see if they could get more money out of it, or maybe gets a little bit more balance of power shifted. But I think, to be fair, it's a business that's new. It's a business that both people have strong points. Clearly, both need each other. There's no question of a restaurant aggregating company surviving without the restaurants. On the other hand, the restaurants, for many of the restaurants, this is probably the fastest way of expanding a chain without necessarily opening more physical restaurants. In that sense, it's a low-cost expansion.
Yeah.
Both need them. the customers need them, because clearly the customers are enjoying the service level that are being offered,
Yeah.
the choice that you can do from sitting at
You
home.
know,
So I think it's important for everybody to sit at home
and
and sit across the table and solve.
the discount addiction. One interesting term which has come up through this fight is the concept of discount addiction.
Yes.
One of the associations saying that we want to, help customers get over this discount addiction. I want to make it broader now. Ujjwal, we spoke at the beginning about how this is a theme across, a couple of sectors. We've seen this with ride aggregators. We've seen this with platforms like Flipkart and Amazon, etc. When vendors feel that they're being shortchanged. Do you think there is a need for any kind of government intervention? Because in some cases, governments have stepped in, or the specific ministries have stepped in to try and find some middle ground. Do you think there is a need for that, or is this something which is best led to, market supply and demand?
No, absolutely. I think government, or when we talk about government, we are talking about the larger, the public or semi-public bodies, and they can definitely add a lot of value. And here, I would not just say that it is the regulations which need to come in, but a lot of times government can add a lot of value by creating the right kind of ecosystem. They can put the right kind of enablers in place, right? So if we take the most recent example of UPI, UPI has been a great enabler for all the internet businesses. So definitely there is a role that government can play. Definitely there should be a framework of a win-win situation, but it should not come as a way of hindering these businesses, because then that is not a win-win situation. If we start saying that this is how you should be running your business, that is not a great way to create that partnership. But if it is about creating an enabling ecosystem for the entire industry, I think that would be that is definitely something that government can play a role in.
I'm just going to take one last word from Mr. Kohli. Of course, you've been speaking of what's happening with restaurant owners. Because that's something you're facing overall. But, what do you make of the broader theme that we've picked up today, where there is a larger fight between aggregators and suppliers, so to speak? It also shows the sort of battle between the old economy and the new economy. Do you think that those who have traditional businesses or restaurants or brick and mortar stores need to sort of be able to grapple with the new way of consumption?
Well, one of the main points of doing business is earning income and profit, and anything is welcome. And any additional, while I made that comment that older and established restaurants really do not need them. Well, they don't need them, but any extra income is welcome. What we are doing is we are not trying to arm twist the aggregators. We are just asking them to come and have a fruitful dialogue with the Federation. Instead of going piecemeal, and solve this problem. We want that it should be solved, and we have sent them already letters, explaining what the issues are, and we're just waiting for a response from them. We have received a few tweets on this, and while we do not really profess or encourage, demonstration, we do, if that is the last resort, and if you're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, how are you going to survive? If the restaurant does not survive and you do not have inventory, what will you sell? Yeah. So we are playing the role of the mediator here.
Okay, we'll wait and see how this plays out in the days to come. But there will have to be a bit of a give and take on both sides. Both sides will also have to understand that consumers who are now addicted to discounts are not going to go back to the old ways anytime soon.
Right.
That's going to be very difficult to leech off. Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the debate this evening.